This program features interviews covering subjects that some listeners may find triggering. Topics that could be discussed include suicide, self-harm, drug addiction, mental illness, domestic violence, and gang violence. Opinions expressed here on the Why You Crying Fu podcast do not represent Reshaping Identity, 805, or any supporting organizations. This program is made possible and part of the state-funded California Creative Corps through a grant awarded by the California Arts Council and administered locally by the Ventura County Arts Council.
Hello, I'm Fernando Albert Salinas. This is the Why You Crying For podcast. Typically, we have a tradition of having people say the title of the show. So if you wouldn't mind, you could say Why You Crying For us. Just the title, just in the way you might say it.
Why you crying, fool?
There you go, see. Today, I'm here with Dr. Gabino Aguirre.
Aguirre.
I even practiced too. I don't know why I had a hard time with your last name. But you've lived a very full life, and I'm sure that even looking at your bio and your CV, that there's things you left out. You wanted to keep it to 2 pages, not 10. I know how active you are. Everywhere I go, I see you there when we're in the community and we're working. And you just can't list all those things. There isn't enough time. So,
And it's still evolving.
of course, yeah. That's one of the beauties of being a community activist, an advocate, is that there's always work to be done. It's a, as they say, a blessing and a curse, because sometimes we need to rest
I've heard
too.
that, yes. Uh-huh.
But I think as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to just let you tell me the story of your life and how your path led you to the work that you do today, and what inspires you to continue to do that work. So I'm going to pass the mic over to you and let you take it away.
All right. Well, let me start out by saying that something that I've learned from indigenous culture is that we're just one little moment in time, and that our ancestors go back thousands and thousands of miles of years and have traveled thousands and thousands of miles, and we're still going. So for myself, my life begins when I was born in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And I was born to a man who was part of the Mexican Revolution in 1812, not in the form of being a military man, but he was just a child who had been taken away from his family, along with thousands and thousands of other children. So when my father was a young boy, then he came under the care of an older 10-year-old who took care of him and protected him. And so he began this journey out of Durango, where he was born, in Biogame, Durango. And then from there, he traveled to Tepic, Nayarit, where he lived with some Huicholes. And then from there, he wanted to, by then he was an older adolescent. Then from there, he went to Torreon, and from Torreon to Mexico City. And then from there, worked his way up to Chihuahua. So in Chihuahua, he became a miner during the time that President Cárdenas nationalized the industries, the mining industry. So for the first time in Mexico, you have labor unions. So my father became part of that labor union, and like all unions, they do very good things, but not everybody is coming from a good place in the union. Not to bag on unions, but as my father, would get up in the morning, still dark, and he would go down into the mine, into the darkness, and then he wouldn't come out till it was dark again. So that was his life. And during that time, mining at that time being very dangerous, then he escaped death a couple of times with pines that caved in, that equipment that failed, etc. So anyway, like all miners, eventually they start getting sick. So one day, a doctor who he had befriended talked to him, and he said, you're worked here now for a few years, and after a few years, people start getting sick, especially with their respiratory illnesses. So he advised my father to get out while he was still young. So he was able to get a kind of like a settlement, I would say, and so they gave him 200 pesos, in
Yeah.
silver.
Wow.
They put it in a bag. He says, I couldn't even carry it, man. So at that time, he had met my mother in Delicias, Parral, Chihuahua, and my mother was 14 when they got married. He was like 20. So very soon thereafter, after the first child was born, my mother became very sick, very sick. And because my father was in the union and they had health care, then he would take her to the union doctors, and the doctors would give her treatments and pills and all this. And she just wasn't getting better. So so one day, after being frustrated with the medical industry, he went to his doctor, jammed the doctor, and the doctor said, "You know what? We can't do anything for your wife because she has an illness that cannot be treated medically. So you need to go out and look for a curandera to help you with this."
Wow.
So my father said, "Vamos." So he went and he found a curandera, and the curandera said to him, "Bring your wife and let me see what I can do." So he took my mother, Candelaria, and looked at her and said, here's I think what's happened is that le hicieron mal ojo.
Mm.
They hexed your wife.
Mhm.
I don't know who it is, but we can, as we go through this, we can try to determine where that negativity is coming from. And my father says, "How much is it going to take?" And he says, "Well, if you help me, then I won't charge you anything." And he says, "So how can I help you?" He says, "After you get out of work, you come, and then I'll send you up in the mountains to get hierbas and whatever I need to, to do my work." So for several years, for a couple of years, my father would get out and he would go home, say hello, go up to the curandera, and then the curandera would send him up in the mountains, and or sometimes the curandera would say, "I'm gonna go up, and there's a lady or a man who's ailing, and I'm gonna go and do some treatment. So you can be my assistant." So my dad says there were times when uh, it was scary, because he says one time we go up in the mountains, and as we're getting close to this place where this man was dying, as we're getting close, you hear all these animals, wild animals, grumbling, and the wind started to blow really hard, and and all of this and all of that, and I just looked at the señora, and she says, "Está bien, está bien, está bien," And then they went into the house, and then it got even louder,
Wow.
And the señora went and touched the man, and almost as soon as she touched him, he started to relax, and all the wind died down, and all of this, So being an educated man, you think, "Oh, well, es un cuento, ¿verdad? Está suave, ¿verdad?" But now, having participated in Native American tradition, then I understand that there's forces beyond, medical forces, and that there's another dimension, that guides our lives every day, So But anyway, to get back to the story, my father took those 300 pesos in a bag, got on his horse, and then my mother got in another horse, and he strapped on his pistola, and they started going toward El Paso,
Oh, okay.
because even then El Norte was a draw, and things were not quite right in Mexico, so he didn't really see a good future for him and his family. So he wanted to see how he could come to the United States. So when he got to, so he lived on his way to Juarez, and he lived here and there. So by the time they got to Juarez, then he looked for a place to live, and not having having a little bit of money left, and not really knowing where to go. He put the family up against a wall and covered with some laminas, and the family lived under those laminas. And then he bought this little plot, started digging in the ground, making adobes from his own land, and started stacking them all around. So he made his first little house like that. And we moved into the shelter, and over the years he added to it, ¿verdad? So anyway, so we got settled in Juarez. So I was born about that time. So from there, then he wanted to see what the United States was all about. So he crossed the Rio, the Rio Grande there by El Paso. Sometimes just in charquito, where you can just kind of walk across, jump across. So he came across and eventually became a bracero, and really got to see what the United States was like, and was impressed, especially with the fact that the school system was available, and that it was accessible. So he found a ranchero that sponsored him in getting papers for all of us, and so he committed to that, and he borrowed $600, and the ranchero says, "You can pay me $25 a month." So what prompted my father really to become quote unquote legal was that while we were living, when we had moved into El Paso, prior to, we just walked across the river, man. Lived at this rancho. So, and because my abuelita and other relatives were living in Juarez, then, on weekends we would always be in Juarez, and, we were living on two worlds, Mexico. So one day we go to Juarez, and when we come back, the rancho, it was called El Rancho Blanco. When we got there, everybody was gone. There were 2 or 3 children that were running around, and a couple of adults, but everybody was gone. And what had happened was that the migra had come in, taken everybody, And so he got out, he looked around, he asked some questions, and he says, "We're going back to Juarez." Went back to Juarez, and we never came back to this side until we were legal, right? Once we were legal, then it was okay. So we come to the United States, and of course we get into the school system right away, and because it's a rancho, and my father became a mayordomo. Then it was in Socorro, Texas. So he became a mayordomo, and then he ran a library, a dairy, and so he became in charge of everything, the milking operations and all of that, and he even learned how to operate on cows, So, and here is a man who had learned how to ride up in the mountains while he was collecting wood for the fire down the hill, So. And while he was up there, they showed him how to write his name, and so that's all he could do, write his name. Never went to school. So little by little, then he learned, and so whenever there were cows that needed they had problems. Then I saw him one time. He just went, and I was a little kid. And he took this cow and he took this big old jeringa that's like hypodermic, and he just goes right through the skin. Waited a little bit, cut her open, opened her up, started reaching in there. They were looking. They said that that the cow had some kind of a tumor, and that he needed to get it. So he's feeling around and all of this, taking it out. And so I marveled at that. ¿Verdad? That here's this Indio who was descended from the Tarahumaras, the Raramuris of Durango, ¿verdad? That was doing that. And so anyway, he was a very impressive man, And my mother was a very loving woman, and she bore 12 children. I was fifth in line. So she took care of the house, but during the day and or after school and on weekends, we would all go out and pick cotton and do whatever. So it was a tough life. We lived next to a dairy that had 500 cows. We right a quarter mile away were some chicken coops, gallineros that had 20,000 chickens, And then on the other side, there were pigs. They had like 2,000 pigs, So we lived in this environment. So it was not unusual for us to come home from school and to see the screen doors just covered with flies. And we'd shoo the flies away and get in. And of course, they were already in. So we'd be eating, and it was like, it was tough. So as a result of that, then we all wound up with tuberculosis, the whole family.
Oh, wow.
So at first, we went to the doctors in Mexico because they were cheaper. And they said, well, this and that, and we don't know what's going on and all this. But eventually they found out that we had all had tuberculosis. So for years, we would take these big old horse pills and that led to some other complications later for some other members of the family. But so anyway, so going back to starting school, I didn't go to kindergarten because it just wasn't available. We lived down in the rancho. The nearest school was 10 miles away, and we had to walk a mile and a half just to catch the bus. So anyway, so I started in first grade, and it was tough because you start school, you don't know any English, and it's in English only in Texas. It's very racist. So they had, so it was difficult. But after first grade, because there were lots of kids in first grade, I got promoted to third grade. And then from third grade, I learned fast. So from third grade, I got promoted to fifth grade. So I caught up with my brother and my sister. We were all in the same room and same class, and we were there was a high grade, like seventh high and seventh low. So we were all in fifth low. So by the time we got to seventh grade, we were in seventh high. So all three of us.
Nice.
So we get into the eighth grade, and here I am. I'm 11 years old. My sister's 13. My brother's 15. We're all in the same class, and I'm an eager beaver because I want to show up my brother. So he was a chingon in school. He was like charismatic and kind of like Rick. So so anyway, it was. My sister died halfway through eighth grade, as a result
Really?
of tuberculosis
Wow.
and other things, And that year, my sister died, and then my grandmother died, and then my little brother died.
Wow.
All within like 6 months. So anyway, going back to my father and being a mayordomo at this dairy, milk was. We drank milk every day. He would bring milk, as much milk as we wanted, just because, And for the braceros and the other workers at there, they did the same. But some of them started taking it to Juarez and selling it. So the boss finds out, jammed my father. When they jammed these folks that were stealing the milk, they said, well, Lino said okay.
Oh, man.
So so the boss goes to my father and he says, what is this that you authorized this, and my father, he was a proud man. He says, you know what, I'm out of here. So so from one day to the next, we packed up all our stuff and we had to go somewhere. And the only place that we could go was move in with a family that lived about 3 miles away. And we moved into one room.
Wow.
Most of the stuff was outside the door. And but eventually, over time, we were able to, to move on. So so fast forward to I get out of 8th grade, and my brother graduates with me, and we go to high school in Isleta High School.
You moved,
Yeah.
and you're in a 1-bedroom. All your stuff's outside the room, so you have a place to sleep. And this is family? They let you stay?
Yeah.
Okay.
There were 9 of us then. So so anyway, eventually we find a place, and my father gets some work, and we move on, and we continue in school in the same town. And we graduate from 8th grade, my brother and I, because my sister had passed away, and we go to Isleta, and the border was 1 mile away. So my brother, being a travieso, we would get to work, we would get to school, and I'd go to class, and he'd go to Zaragoza across the river. And I mean, he's just a teenager, with his friends, and they'd go and raise hell. And then when it was time to come back to catch the bus, he would come back, and so of course he didn't make it out of the freshman year. I moved on and graduated from high school, but in our sophomore year, from the rancho, we moved into the barrio in El Paso, el segundo barrio. And my father by then was working at a smelter, and one day, when everybody would get to work early and get ready for work, and they would have these 55-gallon drums with tires and all that, and there'd be a fire, and the men would be, warming themselves. And so one day there was some gasoline right next to it. My father says, "Hey, quita la gasolina de allí, ¿verdad?" And nobody heard him, so he went and picked it up, exploded.
Wow.
He burned himself, So so he went to. They took him to the hospital. So for about 9 months, he was recovering, and they gave him $25 a month. So we were hustling. Food stamps, whatever there was available, ¿verdad? Ropa de segunda. You survive however you can. Even today, I see it. Same conditions. Yeah. So so anyway, so when he got well enough, to go back to work, he went, and they said, "Well, we don't have a job anymore." So he comes home, tells my mother, he called her Lala. He said, "Lala, ya no tengo trabajo, and ¿qué vamos a hacer? We'll make it somehow." That's how it goes. We'll make it somehow, one way or another. There's hope somewhere. So so there was this contratista that was driving through the barrio saying, "Work available, Oregon, Washington, California, vámonos, ¿verdad? La pizca, strawberries, ¿verdad? Manzana, todo eso, ¿verdad?" So my father heard it, and he says, "We're going." So we get on this bus. We packed everything into one little room, get on this bus with our clothes and a few pans and some cobijas, and we make it all the way to Woodburn, Oregon.
Okay.
And when we get there, We go into, we live in these cabins that were surrounded by pine. It's a beautiful setting, ¿verdad? And so because we were chavalos, ¿verdad? We were young, we saw this and we go, oh, this is cool, man. This is cool. You know, we started running around and all of this. The next morning, of course, you got up in the morning and you went to start working, picking strawberries there. And there in Oregon, you know, you were working and then usually in late morning, it was drizzle, kept working. And then later on in the afternoon, sometimes we had light rain, you know, so we learned to work through all of that. So we worked there two months, and the contratista every week, you know, my father would say, okay, well, are you going to pay us so we need groceries? So he says, oh no, I haven't been paid yet. So they would, so he says, I'll take all of you to the store, you know. So my mother would get up onto the truck, and they'd go all, and so the women would go and get their food and come back. And so, long story short, you know, 2 months later, he was gone. You know? And so one morning we got up, and you know, I mean, the contratista was gone. You know? We went to the owner, the ranchero, and he says, "I've been paying them all along." Yeah. And so he says, well, he says, it's not my fault. I mean, you know, he did it to you, you know. So he says, well, what are we going to do? So this guy, the ranchero, says, I've got probably about 2 weeks of work left, you know, and I'll talk to my neighbor to see whether we can give you a couple of weeks of work. So there were about 10 families then, and we worked here and there. And so after 2 weeks, we made some money. And we bought a one-way ticket to Modesto, California, from Woodburn, Oregon. At that time, we were in Salem, Oregon. So we packed all our stuff in boxes, and we spent all of our money, and we traveled from there to Modesto. And when we got to Modesto, then my father told me, because I was the oldest one, still with a family at that time, you take care of the family, I'm going to go look for work. Came back in the afternoon. He says, we found work and I have a place to stay. My mother says, what did you find? He says, we found a house. You know? So we loaded up our boxes, and we're walking through Modesto, through town. And he takes us to this place where this beautiful white house. And we said, okay, is this it? And the dad says, yeah, you know. The man comes out of the house, and he opens up the garage, and he says, welcome. And it's just, there's trash, there's old equipment, there's cobwebs everywhere, it's dusty and all this. So that's where we lived, you know. So, you know, I joke about, you know, when we opened up our front door,
It was a garage door.
no privacy.
Yeah, that too.
So not going to school either, you know, because it just, you know, so anyway, as far as the migrant experience went for us, you just, I mean, you know, the life of a farm worker and a family is like, you know, you just keep looking for the next job, the next place. And hopefully they have a place for you to live. So whenever we traveled that migrant stream, we always looked for work, and if they had a labor camp. So we always went to a labor camp. So wound up at Gallo in Modesto, in Livingston, California, and picking grapes, wine grapes. And, you know, it was, you know, when we finally got out of that scene, it was because they put us in a field that was infested with wasps. And so when we started going in to pick grapes, then all of a sudden we started in the morning. It's real cold, so the wasps were asleep. But as it warmed up, and you're riling them up, I mean, there were wasps everywhere. And my dad told me, you know, it was me and him. He says, grab some paper, light it, and then go forward. And wherever you see the hive, the panal, burn it so that the smoke will, you know. So that's where we kept going for about, you know, there were about half a mile road. So after a quarter mile, I've been stung about 10, 15 times, my face, my back, my arms. My dad the same, and my dad looked at me and said, can't do this. So we got on the tractor because we were picking gondolas. We got in a tractor and we went to the edge of the field and we said to the guy, we quit and we want to go back to the labor camp where we were. And he said, well, I can't take you. You have to stay here. And he says, and you have to pay $25 a day, for food and lodging, So anyway, we started hearing about Cesar Chavez at that time. So it sounded like that's where we needed to go. So then from there we moved from Modesto. We went to Salinas. My brother was in a sanitarium, a TB sanitarium in Salinas. We picked him up. Went to from there. Went to Chandler, Arizona, and then from there my mother went to get my sister who was in El Paso in another sanatorium, but because of tuberculosis, and she wasn't ready to be released, so she came back by herself, and so anyway, we eventually then wound up in Chandler, Arizona, where I graduated from high school. So when I graduated from high school, I graduated with honors. And I remember going home because my father was working. So when I graduated, nobody went to my graduation. And and I got up in front of everybody, and they put this ribbon on me as being an honor student. And so I went home. My dad had just gotten home, and he said, are you working tomorrow? And I said, yeah. And he says, well, you better get some sleep. That's all he said. And I said, okay. Went to sleep. Next morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, got up, put on my clothes, waited for the pickup to come and get me, jumped in with some other men and boys, and we went out, grabbed a hoe, started working it. By the end of that summer, I couldn't hang anymore, because it was just too hard, too many kids in the family. So my brother, who lived here in California, happened to go and visit, and he had been lost. We hadn't seen him or known from him for about 3 years. So anyway, so I decided to come back. He invited me to come back to Califas with him, and I was 15 years old, and came here to Califas. We lived in a room half the size of this apartment.
Wait a minute.
It's
You
me,
graduated when you were 14?
15.
You graduated high school at 15
Yeah.
because you were getting moved forward. Like throughout your life, you were doing really well in school, so it kept moving you forward.
Yeah,
So by
yeah.
15, you
I mean, I learned to read before I got to school,
Yeah.
Because my mother used to read these novelas, they were like little booklets. They were all romantic novelas. So she'd be reading, and we'd be looking over her shoulder. And of course, Spanish is a very easy language to read, because you don't have long A's and long E's and all of this that you do in English. But yeah, it's so anyway, I came to California and I lived with my brother for about a month, and because he had a baby and he was married, and things started happening, and I just didn't feel like I didn't feel comfortable intruding on his life. So one day I said, I need to go and find myself a place to live, and he said, okay. So I found an apartment for $25 a month. It was a room, and it had a restroom, and it had a kitchen downstairs, and it was a communal kitchen and communal restroom. So I lived there and lived in a hospital, worked in a hospital, a children's hospital, and one day, oh sorry,
Oh, that's perfect.
Uncle Sam knocked at the door,
that's
and so I was required to report and for the selective service system, and 3 months later, I'm in Fort Ord getting my head shaved and losing all my clothes and becoming a soldier of the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. And I had told myself, because I didn't know anything, I was from country boy, I didn't know you could, go for a deferment and all that, And so anyway, I became a soldier, and I had told myself I'm going to do the best that I can, and I'm going to get out of this sucker, And so they put me in a headquarters company where there were GIs coming back from short timers from Vietnam, and they were all broken people. ¿Verdad? Physically, some of them were handicapped. They'd been shot. They were mentally, they were like freaked, PTSD and all that. And I know that when I first started working, when I was first assigned to that place, that company, my first sergeant said, "Don't you ever go into the barracks at night," because men had brought back weapons. They were edgy. They were, they were freaked out. So I got assigned to this division that did experimented. It was an experimentation division, and I had been asked if I wanted to get into computers, and my answer was, "What are computers?"
Of course.
My first sergeant says, "I don't know, but it's something that's coming. What do you want? What do you think?" And I said, "Sure." So I went away to computer school in New Jersey and Syracuse, New York, and came back, and along with me came a computer that was housed in 2 trailers, and it had the capacity of those computers was even less than what you have in the cheapest iPhone that you can get right now. So I started working there, and at first it was very interesting because you're doing laser guidance missiles, night technology, jungle tactics, guerrilla fare, all of that, and because this computer was located on top of a hill, we'd look down and see all these men that were moving in squads, and they all had what are called man packs, and the scientists would say, "Okay, man pack 22, 24, 27, and 29, you're down," and they would just sit down. And then they would be approaching the enemy, pop-up targets, sound effects, y todo eso. So for me, it was like, I'd look at video games now, and that was the initial video game.
That was the first.
Yeah. So, but because I met some folks that were political and anti-military, then I started hanging out with them, and eventually realized that I couldn't continue to do this anymore. So I went to a mission, and I asked the father there, actually a friar. It was a Franciscan mission. I asked him if they would shelter me, and they said, "Well, it's highly unusual, it was it was in the middle of this military reservation, San Antonio de Padua mission by King City. And so he said, "I have to consult my higher up, so come back in a couple of days." So a couple of days later, I go, and they said, "Okay." So I went back to my hooch, packed up my bags in a duffel bag, got my stereo that had only one speaker, and I had only one album. Moved into this mission. It was like this austere, very austere setting, a bed, a basin with water, a chair. That was it.
What was the album? I'm just curious.
Monday?
You said you had one album.
Yeah.
Which one was it? Was it the Beatles?
What? No. No, I put it on, ¿verdad? And squeaked out "Stairway to Heaven."
Okay, so a little Zeppelin for you.
Yeah. So anyway, then I heard from a camarada that you could get out early if you signed up for college, and nobody had ever talked to me about college. Never. And they says, well, like what college? You know, he says, well, you just get yourself into college and, you know, you can get out 3 months early. So I contacted my parents who were now living in Visalia by that time. And I enrolled in a community college and got accepted. So I got out 3 months early. Went to school. After the first semester, pulled straight A's. My counselor called me in and says, "You don't belong here. You belong in the university." And I said, "Well, like where?" He says, "Well, we have a relationship with UCSB, you know, Santa Barbara. Where's that?"
Yeah.
Well, you like it, yeah. So applied to UCSB and went to school there for a couple of years. Got involved with partying and politics, student politics, and eventually started to pay less and less attention to my studies, yeah, because it was so exciting, you know, politics, man, you know. But so one day, this one girl that I befriended, she said, "Gabino, you're wasting your time here. You know, you have all this potential. You're not doing anything with it. You know, so you need to, you know, you need to buckle up, or you need to do something else because you're wasting your time." You know, and I said, "Get out of here. You know, and I don't ever want to see you again." Nobody had ever talked to me like that. So, but I heeded her words, transferred to UCLA and finished school at UCLA. Yeah. And so while I was at UCSB and after I transferred to UCLA, I had met this one young girl in Visalia in community college. She had gone to Fresno and I had gone down here to school. So we kind of maintained a kind of like a light relationship. And one day, you know, I called her up and we kind of like regenerated our relationship and eventually got married and went to live in by MacArthur Park in LA. And I was finishing school as a senior. And so because I lived because I went to school in UCLA, I needed to live in a place that was close enough to commute because we didn't want to live in the city anymore. We lived there the first summer we were married. So she got a job at Oxnard Elementary, and we moved into Nyland Acres, she and I.
Okay.
And so very quickly got involved with the political scene here in the county. So, you know, at that time we're talking about somebody came across with the idea of you know, we need a concilio like the one they have in San Jose. Yeah? Well, what is it all about? Well, it's like this, and like this, you know. So we founded El Concilio. Yeah? I volunteered at first while I was finishing school. I volunteered with a farm worker education program in Santa Paula, and one of my camaradas who had graduated from school that I'd gone to school with at UCSB was running that program, so he invited me to volunteer. And so after a couple of months, one day he says, "You know, there's a free clinic over there, over on Main Street. Go see what they need." So I went over and I met this woman. Her name's Maria Hummel. She was a registered nurse who was providing a free clinic, you know, and she didn't have anything. It was like this room with one chair, 2 chairs, one table, and then she was doing blood pressure screening and things like that, you know. So I met Maria, and I came back, and she says, Sireño, who's my camarada, he says, "So what did you find out?" He says, "She needs resources bad, you know. I mean, she's doing whatever she can with what she has, but." So he says, "Well, why don't you write a proposal and see if we can help her, all right?" So I started researching, having gone to school and knowing about research. I started to research, you know, what I could do to help her. I wrote this grant, and lo and behold, a couple of months later, we got $250,000. You know, so that was the beginning of Las Clínicas del Camino Real.
Wow.
Because the grant called for quote unquote professional staff, ¿verdad? Maria Hummel eventually was fired from her position, and then you know, new staff took over, and with all of this money, and because it was during the early 70s, and money was available for healthcare and clinics, community clinics, then it started growing. So now you have a clinic that serves 50, 60,000 patients a year.
How many locations now?
13 or
13,
14.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and in fact, I just spoke to the new director. Her name's Dr. Pawar, about this monument that to Cesar Chavez that was erected there on the Statham Clinic in honor of primarily funded by Roberto Juarez. Yeah? And asked her why Roberto wasn't invited to be part of that celebration. So we're fighting that right now, and we're planning something that's coming up pretty soon on that front. But anyway, so got involved with El Concilio. Eventually became a board member of El Concilio. Got involved with the Clínicas. Eventually, that flowered into Las Clínicas. Got involved with farm worker movement. Got involved with Cabrillo Village. Cabrillo Village, don't know whether you know the history of Cabrillo Village, but
I do, but maybe the listeners don't know.
yeah.
Maybe you could just quick summary of.
Yeah, Cabrillo Village was a farm labor camp in Saticoy, and so because like all farm workers, continued to be oppressed, underpaid, and overworked, and no health care and no benefits at all, other than a broken back and disabled condition, as you move on in your years. So one day, the owners, after the residents of Cabrillo Village started to get involved with the United Farm Workers Union, the ranchero eventually said, "You know what? I'm going to knock it down, the village, and so all of you need to go somewhere." So all these familias, they freaked out, and they started talking about, what are we doing? What do we do? What do we do? So they decided to. They really didn't know what to do, but they decided to stand strong. So by then I had become director of this farm worker education program my camarada was running before, and so I'm sitting in my office, and we're hustling food vouchers for them through this organization that I was employed with, called the Greater California Educational Project. And we're pushing food vouchers to the familias at Cabrillo Village so that they could survive. And so I get a call from L.A. This reporter called me on the phone, and he says, "Hey, we want to do a story in Ventura County. What's happening on Labor Day?" It was 1974, 73 or 74. I think it was 74. So I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, we're looking for some community interest story." And I said, "Well, have you heard of Cabrillo Village?" And he says, "No, what's that?" So I told him the story. So that Sunday, when they were going to knock down these buildings, and the carapilas were there, and all the gente were around their campo, locked arms, right when it was supposed to happen, the TV truck show up, and all these reporters and cameras come out, and they start filming everything. Stopped it. They stopped it. And then after because of the publicity, negative publicity that had been generated because of his story, then they backed off on knocking it down, and they themselves, as a group, organized into a collective, a housing cooperative, and so they became part owners of their property. They put together, I think each family was supposed to contribute to start $1,000, and I know some of the familias that were there and said $1,000 was like 10,000 now. where do we come up with $1,000, right? So they sold their jewelry, they borrowed from familias, they sold enchiladas, sold tamales, whatever they could. They put together a feria, and they became this cooperative, and they started running it, and it became a very famous battle cry for the farm worker movement. And in fact, the Cabrillo village, some of their staff was invited to go to the Soviet Union so they could talk about, because they had cooperatives in the Soviet Union. Yeah? So anyway, also while I was working with that program, we had these familias that came from Camarillo, farm worker familias, and came to the center where I was working with this project, and they said, we don't understand why we don't have migrant summer school anymore. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, before they used to do summer school, and our children would, they benefited from. So they said, could you do something about that? So I went and talked to some teachers, Chicana teachers in Camarillo, and they said that's true. They used to provide it, but for whatever reason, they decided not to continue it. So we decided, myself and a committee of us, my wife and a couple of other people, we decided to go and visit the superintendent. And essentially, I went to the superintendent and said, I have a money-making deal offer to make. And he says, what is that? He says, well, it's come to our knowledge that you don't provide migrant school, summer school anymore, and the community is demanding that. So I don't want you to tell me why you don't do it anymore, but I'll tell you that I can make you some money. And he says, well, the reason we don't have it anymore is because the parents just would send their kids, but the kids wouldn't come, and all of this. And I said, well, I'll make you some money, man. So I said, I'll recruit the parents. You give me a school. You let me hire my own staff. You let me do my own curriculum, and you provide a kitchen, and we're on. So my wife and I, we went through all the ranchos around. By then, we had also approached the Somas and Mesa Union school districts on that same issue, and made them. I said, we need to provide this service. So we went out, and on the first day of school, we had 250 children, families, and we hired Javier Gomez was one of the first. My wife, who's an excellent teacher, was one of them. Olivia Menchaca, who was from Camarillo, also. So we hired our staff, and we had a very strong cultural focus, where we did not, of course, math and reading and all of that, but we did teatro, we did music, we did folklorico, we had parent gatherings, we engaged them all, and it was like a terrific experience. And whereas I had been working with farm workers out of this office, now I found myself almost exclusively at this Adelante program with all these children, and I liked it. I liked what was happening. It was exciting. So I decided to go back to school, and went back to school to SC, and got a master's in education and a credential, an elementary teaching credential, and came back and started teaching in Moore Park as an bilingual elementary school teacher. And then from there, about 3 years later, the principal came up to me and said, why are all these kids in your class after school? And my wife's a master teacher, Rick knows her, So on the first day of school, when I started, we had all these games, all these manipulatives, all this material, curtains, everything, musical instruments and all this. So after school, all the chavos would come to my class, and I would play the guitar, and they would do the drums, and they'd be drawing, and they'd be, they were having a good time. It was like a community room after school, right? so the principal marveled in that and said, "You need to be a counselor." And so I went back to school, became a counselor, 2 years at CLU. And
You went to every college on the coast.
Monday?
You went to every college and university on the coast.
Kind of. I'll tell you a story, ahorita, about my granddaughter. Yeah, so I became a counselor, and then I was an elementary school counselor. Loved it. Talking with parents. Primarily, I came to understand that the problems of children usually are generated by parents. So I would do a lot of work with parents, and it worked. It worked. And so as I was doing this, then a couple of years later, same principal came to me and he said, "You need to become a principal." So I go back to school, got an administrative credential. So I started. Before I even got my credential, they offered me a position, and the position was to build a new school, an alternative school, and to have me run it. So I said, I do my own curriculum. I hire my own staff. So we started this school, and then we started with like 25 students. And the first night that I met with the students and the parents, I explained what we were doing, and then I said to all the chavalos, I said, "You know what? I work for you, because you're our future." And then I went to parents and I said, "I work for you too, but this isn't going to work unless we all work together. So I'll do my part. The students need to do their part, but you need to do your part, And some of the parents say, "Well, how can we help them at home?" I said, "Well, first of all, you need to show that you love them. Second of all, you need to show an interest in school. Third of all, you can't go back to the time when you used to spank them and belittle them when you punished them when they did something wrong. These are teenagers, They don't understand that anymore. They're looking for themselves. They're looking for their own self. And if you're telling them every time that they bring home or you get a call from the school that they got in trouble or whatever, and you're telling them next time you're going to be out of here, stop lying to them, because I know that you're not going to kick them out. So we need to work on that. So I'm not only enrolling your child, but I'm enrolling you in school. So you need to come to school because we have to talk about these things. So we set up parent committees and so long story short, became a model school, one of the first model schools in California as an alternative school. And then while I was working at the school, then I decided that the kids would bag on me because they would say, "You work us too hard, you give us all this homework and we don't have time to have fun and all of this and all of that." So I said, "I'll show you." Went back to school, got a PhD. So when they would complain that I stayed up all night, trying to study for this test, I'd say, "Well, what do you think I did?" I got out of here at 5:00, went to school at 7:00 at UCLA, got out at 11, got home at midnight, and I'm here at 6:00 in the morning for you. So anyway, during that time, then I was invited to run for office for city council. And I'd been invited many times, and I always declined, and my excuse was my kids are still young, and I'm still working on my dissertation, That was my big excuse. But the truth of the matter is that I was already an organizer in the community, and my wife every once in a while would say, "Time out, you're straying too much, we have children, you need to stay close to home now." Yeah? So I always try to avoid any other entanglements. But one day, as we were members of an election committee, And the candidate that we had, who was already a city councilwoman, she didn't register in time for the position. So there's a little story behind that. But anyway, so one night I got a call and they say, you know what, we don't have a candidate anymore. She didn't file on time. We don't have a candidate anymore. Let's meet at Vince's Restaurants, which is Javier Montes' father's restaurant. So we called Javier and said, we need a place to meet. So it was like 11 o'clock at night. He meets us there, opened the door. There's about 6 or 7 of us there. And then the story comes out, this is what happened. We don't have a candidate and all of that. And then we all looked at each other and said, one of us has to step up. All of us went like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of us has to do it, and this and that, and this and that. We already have a machine, and we got all this. We raised a little bit of money and all of this, So finally, it was like I thought it was a setup. They said to me, Gabino, you're done with school. Your kids are grown. You don't have any more excuses, man. You're the man, So I said to them, if you help me, I'll go for it. I'll do one term. Yeah? And so I became a candidate, knocked it out of the park. With
City
the work that
council
we did.
for which city?
Santa Paula.
Okay. I'm just putting it all together in my head,
Yeah.
making sure.
So Santa Paula. Yeah? So I got in, and I remember my first meeting, and there were 2 progressives, 2 very conservatives, and myself. So I was a chingon. I was, here I was.
Progressive, conservative, and chingon.
Yeah, kind of like that. ¿verdad? So we walk into this meeting, and I get elected to be vice mayor right off the top.
Wow.
And so I'm sitting to the right hand of the mayor, and I thought to myself, oh, okay, this is a time where we change the town. I'm thinking like, Raza Unida kind of reality. So I make my first proposal to do this, and it was like having to do something with Cabrillo Village, affordable housing, And I thought that, we got 2 progressives, myself, I'm the 3rd vote. And, so we can do this, So one of the progressives voted no. I was crushed. I'm sitting there. I couldn't believe it, City manager looks at me. He says, are you all right? I said, yeah, just give me a minute, man. I'll be right back. Went, washed my face, came back and said, okay, I guess this is the reality of politics, man. Yeah. You got to do your homework before you walk in the door, right? So anyway, we dealt with all kinds of things. The kids came to us and said, we don't have very many things to do in town. We want a skate park. I make the motion, give them a skate park. Boom, dedicated the skate park. Affordable housing. Okay, we got this on the line and all of this. Okay, let's do it. So anyway, we were able to do a few things. One day, I get a call from Carmen Ramirez. And Carmen Ramirez says to me, there's going to be a meeting at the United Nations on nuclear weapons, and they're inviting all mayors from around the world to go. So what do you think? And I said, who's organizing this? He says, the mayor of Nagasaki and the mayor of Hiroshima. They're the 2 chairs. They're called Mayors for Peace. And I said, okay, I'll sign up. And she says, we don't have any money. I said, oh, no problem. On things like this, I have money. A little bit of money. So anyway, I started looking into, the nuclear weapons free there's all these laws related to nuclear weapons. Find out that that there's like 25,000 nuclear weapons around the world. Most of them belong to the United States and China, and there's 5 or 6 nuclear powers, and there's laws, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that says that, okay, if you're a country, we can give you nuclear technology so you can have nuclear reactors, but you can't use those for nuclear weapons, right? They're going back and forth on this, and the nuclear powers, of course, are saying to all the little countries, you can't go there, can't go there. So I show up at the United Nations and check in at the hotel, go downstairs to the breakfast room where we're going to meet the 2 mayors from Japan and everybody else, everybody else that was coming from around the world for this, and I was the only mayor from the United States there. And so Mayor Akiba from Hiroshima, he says, Dr. Aguirre, I don't see any of your friends here. What happened? Le go, well, I guess it was poor organizing on somebody's part, because I think I think that there's more persons than myself here in this country that are interested in this issue. So I don't know where they are. So anyway, we go into the Great Hall later on that day, and there's this debate. We're there. They have these earphones that you just hang on your ear, and then they have a bank of translators in every language, and whatever you can choose whatever language you want, and so then we there was a debate on the hall, and then we went and met with other folks in the government about that, and then we went out on the street, had a demonstration, and it was like right on. So I come back, and I'm kind of I tell my story. I'm this local hero because of that. So then I get a call from Japan, and they say we need to go to the National Mayor's Council that's going to be in Boston, and we're gonna ask them to approve a resolution to end nuclear weapons by 2028. And so can you come? So I go, and then I'm working with their main organizer, and so they have a draft letter. I made a few suggestions. They printed it, and so when it came to the vote, it passed the resolution, and Santa Paula was the first one to sign that letter. Now there's like 2,500 cities in the world that have signed that letter. So then I come back and tell my story and all of this, and then they say, well, do you know anything about nuclear weapons-free zones? And I said, I know a little bit. And he says, well, it turns out that the top half of the globe is nuclear, the bottom half is non-nuclear. So these all the nuclear weapons, the nuclear-free zone countries are meeting in Santiago, Chile, and we want you to go down as part of a delegation, representing the organization that had a position at the United Nations called the Atomic Mirror. That was a local organization that had an office here in Ventura County. They had one in London. So I affiliated myself with the Atomic Mirror. We go down to Chile. Carmen Ramirez goes with me. And we sit in this chamber of deputies with all these folks from all over. They're all diplomats, and I have been writing this statement. So once we started talking, it seemed to me like they were dancing around the main issue, ¿verdad? So I said, well, this is what I think. I read my position paper. No, but it was silent. Nobody said anything. And then I looked at Carmen, and she says, so we walked out of that chamber of deputies later on that afternoon, and I asked Carmen, so what happened? What do you think? And he says, well, she kept looking back. And I said, what's the problem? He says, He says, secret police, man, you know. I'm just trying to make sure the secret police aren't following us. And so anyway, came back to the United States, did a report to the community on that, and then I got invited to go to the Civil Society Forum in Mexico City, and they asked me to be a co-chair. There was a woman, I don't forget her name, a senator in the Mexican government who was going to co-chair with me. And so we go to this hall and around Tlatelolco Park, you know, where they had the student massacre. And we go to this hall. It's like the top floor of this building, and there's this big room, and there's the largest round table I'd ever seen. You know, it's like 50 yards. Well, maybe not that big, but it was big, and it was full all the way around. So then it was like, the senadora me mira y me dice, ¿estás listo? Le digo, Simón. Dice, okay, we'll gavel it in. And we got into, you know, nuclear weapons kind of stuff. Came back and did a community report, and, you know, it was like everything was okay. So this happened while I was mayor and councilman there in Santa Paula. And one day they, you know, after I come back from the United Nations, one of our doctors there in Santa Paula, who had been one of the original founders of Physicians for Social Responsibility, he says, I like what you're doing, and I'd like to make a proposition that Santa Paula become a nuclear weapons free zone. And I go, you go to in public comment and you propose it, and I'll make the motion, and we'll see where it goes. So anyway, I couldn't get a second vote on that one.
Really?
Yeah. So, but anyway, so that was all good, you know, being on that. But during that time, you know, Cabrillo Economic Development Corporation with Rodney Fernandez, they were struggling to build Rodney Fernandez Garden. It's called Rodney Fernandez Gardens, and they had they were working with me and a couple of other folks on the council to get their affordable. They were into affordable housing project approved, but they never. But by my first term, 4-year term as a councilman, I was lucky to work with a couple of other progressive members. After that, we proposed a housing project that was going to be 2,000 homes, and we pushed for 400 of those homes to be affordable housing, and we passed. It passed, you know. So we were like all jazzed, and then the reactionaries in the community pushed back, and they killed the project, you know. So anyway, that's just how politics goes, you know. So when I decided after that stint on the council that that was enough for me. 2 terms. It was just too hard. And so right before I exited the council in December, I had been encouraged by Marisela Morales to apply for the California Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. And I said, well, what is that all about? He says, well, you know, it's about drawing political districts. And he says, I said, I don't know anything about that. So he says, well, why don't you go down to the meeting in LA and see what they say? You know? So I went down and I walked in, and there were like all these, it was like in by Universal Studios, and they're around Burbank. Went into this auditorium, and there were maybe 300 people there, and they were all like eager to become members of this commission, talking about redistricting, gerrymandering, all of this. And so they said, anybody that's interested, we're going to pass out this application form. You fill it out. And so I didn't want to come back and tell the gente I decided not to do it. I filled it out. Forgot about it. So about 4 months later, I get a call from this local reporter, and he says, "Gabino, yes, this is so and so. How are you feeling?" And I go, "I'm feeling great, you know." And he says, "Well, what do you mean?" And he says, "Well, that commission, the redistricting commission, you made the cut. Out of 37,000 applicants, it's down to 5,000. You're one of those 5,000." And I go, "Oh, firme, one of 5,000." So anyway, he says, "So what do you think?" And I said, "I don't think anything, man. There's no way, no chance." So a month later, he calls me up and he says, "How are you feeling now?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, it's down to 500. You're one of the 500, So I told my wife, and she says, "Well, it looks like it might happen. I think we should buy you some new clothes, and you should go up to Sacramento and kind of lobby for yourself. Meet with the interview panel and all of and kind of let them know who you are. And I said, No, that's not my style. I mean, I never really looked for anything in my life. It always kind of came to me. If it happens, it happens. So it got down to 64. I was one of the 64. And then the Democratic Party and the Republican Party could look at that list and strike 2 people off that list. And so I think about 36 people or something like that got scratched off, and then it got down to a smaller number, So what they did is they put their name on a little ball, and they put it inside this thing that went around, and it's like bingo.
Yeah.
And then it fell out, and it says, "Okay, Jeannie Araya from Los Angeles," and then Cynthia Dye from San Francisco, and Peter Yao from Claremont, and so anyway, they chose the eight little balls came out, so those were the 8. I wasn't one of them. So then so the way that the law read was that those 8 were supposed to look at the remaining members, applicants, and to choose the other 6. And meanwhile, as part of our application, they had sent us 2 essay exams, and so I responded, to and the exams. There were 3 questions. The question was, "What's your interest in redistricting?" The second one, "How do you feel about diversity in California, geographic and racial, ethnic?" And the third question was something like, "Do you think you can be fair?"
Good question.
Those 3. So I responded and sent it in, and then after that they sent us another essay test, and we had to respond to some other questions. So and then we had to go through an interview. So I bought some new clothes. Went and got interviewed, and then they didn't tell you yay or nay or anything. They were like real poker faced, and I walked out and I said, "No way, man." So it turned out that of those first 8, 4 of them were Asian, not representing the diversity in California at all. There were 2 Chicanos, there was 1 black man, and there was 1 Filipino. So when they started talking about, "Hey, we're supposed to represent the diversity in California, so we need more Latinos," So my name came up, and I had a couple of people, Maria Blanco, who's a lawyer, and Jeannie Raya, who's a lawyer also, and they argued on my behalf. So one day I got the call. And I remember going to the first meeting, and it was like Democrats and Republicans, and 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 others declined to state, nonpartisan. You know? And I thought, as soon as I walk in the door, the cuchillos are going to come out, and it's going to be like a little bloodbath, right? Surprisingly, it was not like that at all. It was like we were all mission driven. We all kind of had an idea of what redistricting was all about. All of us had, almost all of us were professional. So we had an understanding of politics and, how it works and all this. And so anyway, we started meeting, we got some training, and we didn't have an office, we didn't have computers, we didn't have phones, we didn't have anything. And so when it started, as soon as we started, then Pelosi put a proposition on the ballot to kill the Independence Redistricting Commission, to kill it, and that was defeated, so we made it. So we moved forward with drawing districts throughout California, 80 assembly districts, 40 Senate districts, and 53 congressional districts. And you looked at the results of the census, and I've worked with the census just about every year for the last 3 decades, so I know what that was all about, but I didn't know the angle on political redistricting. So we started, how do you, none of us had any mapping experience. I mean, you're supposed to draw maps. What does that mean, So what it meant was that you need to divide California into 53 equal chunks of 720,000 people. Then you have to draw 80 districts, assembly districts of approximately 400,000 people. And then you have to draw 40 Senate districts of twice that number, about 800,000 people, So you have 35, 36 million people in California. So you have to draw them, and they all have to, it's one, the Voting Rights Act says that it's one vote, one person, which means that everybody has to be counted. So based on the census data, then we started working, and we drew all of those districts. We were challenged in the state Supreme Court 3 times, and we prevailed. We had to go to the Department of Justice, and we were challenged there in Washington. We prevailed. And as a result of that, in the last 10 years, between 2000 and 2010, there had been like over 600 elections related to congressional districts in California. And out of those 600 elections, only in 10 years, only 2 positions had changed. Either an incumbent got beaten by somebody else, or somebody retired and somebody else moved in. So we understood that the history of that was sweetheart deals between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the fix was in, So after the elections, after that first redistricting, like 35% of all the district changed hands in California.
I want to let you run and tell more of your story, but there's a couple of things that you brought up that I found interesting, and the few things that I know about you. And one thing that you mentioned is that when you were in the classroom and students were staying, I feel that what I heard you say was that it was because you provided them art and a way to express themselves by providing them things to draw on and music instruments to play. And the arts, to me, as an artist myself, are extremely important. And bringing that into the classroom, I think, frees students. It allows them to play. And when they feel as though they're trapped in a classroom to study without having an opportunity to play, I think it makes students not want to be there,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge that I definitely heard you say that bringing arts into the classroom was
Yeah.
important.
I'll say a couple of things about that. That, when we founded our alternative school, I hired a professional musician to work for me,
Mm.
and a professional artist to work for me, and a coach from a junior college to work for me. So we had a rock and roll band, we had a reggae band. We won every art competition that our kids ever entered, and we had a touch football team and a softball team, undefeated.
Wow, that's
So
great.
yeah, and so that's the first thing that that was part of the plan to honor the interest of these youngsters. And right now I'm involved with a project that goes by the title of the Santa Paula Highest Quality Universal Early Childhood Education Pilot Project.
That's a lot.
And on the day that we launched that project, there was this little girl that was born in town by the name of Isabella. She's now 2 years old. So what I've learned about early childhood education is that for young children, it's about discovery and it's about play. That's what it is. That's learning. You can't sit down with them and say, okay, we're gonna go through, we're gonna learn how to read. You gotta have fun, and you need to have that experience. And not only do children need this experience of play, but we need to bring the parents along. Remember, I enrolled the parents with the children. That's what we're doing with the Isabella project. Is that we will be we will take mothers almost as soon as a child is born, give them some information so that when you go home, look for these things. Talk to your baby, sing to the baby, make sure you love them, make sure you hug them. Don't yell at them, and all of this. And and then my wife does some workshops where she brings young children and the parents, and then she has all these math games. She shows the kids and the parents at the same time how to play these games. And then when they leave, ¿verdad? And these are parents that have very little education, some of them. When they leave, they take a box of material home so that they can continue their learning, right? So we've had experiences where the child will have a book and go to dad and say, "Oh, listen to me read." "Oh, no. Why voy a hacer nada?" "Mami, quiero leerte esto." ¿Verdad? "Oh, estoy muy ocupado." ¿Verdad? No, So we're saying you have to take time for children. You have to, ¿verdad? Especially when they show that spark of interest in learning, you have to honor that. And so with the Isabella Project, not only is it going to be like a learning for children, it's going to be a learning for parents. It's also a wellness program because we're going to have wraparound services for not only the child but the family, because if the child is not healthy, then the family's not healthy, and vice versa, right? So, but in addition to that, because there's $40 million that are sitting in Washington and California that belong to Santa Paula children, right? 40 million that is not coming down. Once we bring it down, and we plan to bring it down, then it's an economic boost for the community. So, in addition to giving kids a quote unquote head start in the educational system. So,
I teach at a lot of schools, and I often wonder how the students would be different if their parents were sitting there with them. Would they be? I just wonder. I want to see it every once in a while. I know that parents are, at least a lot of the parents in the communities where they're working the fields or whatever, they cannot afford to miss a day of work. But if actually 2 weeks ago, I was at Wainimi, and this girl wrote a poem. I had them write on the concept of belonging, and she wrote about how she knew she belonged in school, and that she's doing really well in high school, because when she was in middle school and she graduated, she knew she was going to walk and get a certificate, but she knew that her parents weren't going to be there. And then she broke down crying. I said, "What's going on? What's wrong?" She said, I looked out into the audience and my mom was sitting in the very front. And since then, I've done everything in my power to get straight A's, to get good grades. And I really do believe that I couldn't be at all my kids' functions, and I thought I had to work to give them a better life, and the things that all parents think.
Yeah.
But I know that now, I know if I could have been more involved in their education,
Yeah.
right there with them, they might have a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that that's not mentioned in here is that you submitted a nomination for the Ventura County Poet Laureate, Luz Maria Espinosa, and she served 2 terms. And she is a gem to the community. She goes into the schools and teaches and has books published for the students and has their parents show up for their assemblies and celebrates them.
Yeah.
And so again, I just wanted to acknowledge the art inside of you, and because I know that it makes an impact in people's lives, and I wanted to add it to the list of all the things that you've done.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think we're all artists within ourselves, but we never have the chance, So one day I took it on myself to do some murals in town, So,
Yeah. Graffiti? Were you tagging the walls over here?
yeah, I was doing, and I was working with, we had just set up a cultural center called Santa Paula, ¿cómo? Floricanto, Santa Paula Floricanto, and Javier Gomez and myself and another brother, Antonio, we were all funding that, $100 a month, to keep it going, Got a free building and all this, and right across the street were some walls. We said, let's do some murals. So, I got some brochas and I did some, ¿verdad? I did some murals with children, and when I was in elementary school, murals still there. And then I started playing the guitar and became a member of a group called Los Losers, the Losers. And that was exciting, man, to be up on stage. And, we would go play, and we usually didn't get paid, but when we got paid, we'd go down to the cantina, shoot pool, and drink it all, right? It was like, it was rare that we got paid, but we just had such a great time, and you were like, we'd finish playing, and then they'd say, well, where are you going next? We're going to go to the cantina. They'd all come down with us, right? Just to continue. So, but anyway, it's fantastic. The right brain is one that we really don't cultivate in this society. So.
Well, I heard you talk about saging or ceremonies or something in between our quick break, and which takes me back to your roots and your father learning through observation and then passing that down to you. Can you tell me a little bit more about the spiritual side of your life?
Yeah. We were, after I moved to Santa Paula and got involved with some community things, and we heard that there was a pilgrimage coming from Alaska, and there was another pilgrimage that was coming from Chile, and they were going to meet in Mexico City, and they were carrying these banners, the banners of the condor and the banners of the eagle, going to meet in Mexico City. We found out that they were coming, and so we got the information that they were going to be coming through Ventura County, and that the Black Berets were coming from San Jose, and they were providing security for this group that was coming through, and they wanted to know whether we could house them while they came here through Ventura County. So we said, yeah, So they were particularly interested in visiting the community, the labor camp of Rancho Cespe, which is there between Fillmore and Santa Paula, there by the Santa Clara River. They wanted to, because that was a struggling community, they wanted to meet some of those folks, and they wanted to have a ceremony there. So we were able to set it up, and my first sweat lodge was there by that river, and it was by this Chicano. His name was Chemo. So Chemo, he developed he ran the ceremony, and then from there continued with sweat lodging, and eventually was invited to a teepee meeting by this medicine man called, his name was Little Fish, Kanuka's Little Fish. So we go into this teepee meeting, and we have to get some medicine, and we so about 2 or 3 weeks after I went through that ceremony, I go home, and I'm excited to tell my dad about, because he would talk about the huicholes and that being Tarahumara himself. And so I said, ¿Sabe qué? I went through the ceremony, and, this is how it started. So I told him, sweat lodge first, cleansing, smoking you down before you enter the teepee. You get down on your knees, left to the right. The medicine man kind of calls the meeting to order. There's a fireman at the door. Somebody else, his assistant, that's there. The medicine comes in. They start to partake in all of this. So then right when I'm halfway through that story, he says, stop right there. And I said, what? He said, let me tell you how it ends. And then he told me the story. ¿Verdad? Y le digo, ¿usted también? Y dice, pues, los huicholes. What are they known for, right? So yeah. So to this day, ¿verdad? I burn sage on a regular basis. Whenever I go home, eventually my sister or my brother, one of them will say, did you bring any sage? I say, yeah. I said, well, can you do a little circle for us? Yeah. So every single time the familia gets in a circle and burn some sage, I throw out some palabras, pass the smoke to everybody, and then everybody has a chance to express themselves, and it really grounds us, and in that moment we're the clan, we're a familia, we're strong, ¿verdad? And then we move on from there, and members of my family have said, you know what, we look forward to you coming because of that, ¿verdad? Because we take time for each other, ¿verdad? Outside of that sage ceremony, we just do not take time for each other. So yeah, it was. So anyway.
The other part that I found interesting is that when I did my ancestry, my family comes from Durango to El Paso, and then to California.
To Santa Paula.
Yeah.
See.
Isn't that wild? It's just,
Yeah. Well, there's
we take a lot of similar paths.
Yeah, well, there's my wife, who's from San Benito, Texas.
Okay.
Like her path with migrant farm work was going to Colorado, going to Indiana, and then going to Idaho and Utah, and not necessarily Washington or Oregon the way that I did.
That's cool. It's good to know your family's history and your history.
Yeah,
a lot of us don't even know our own history. So.
Yeah. So I know that that there's an interest in mental health, ¿verdad? So right now we've organized a centro it's called El Centro del Pueblo, ¿verdad? There in town. I'm a pro bono executive director of that Under One Roof project. We have about 5 organizations there, and of course, Santa Paula being the poorest or one of the 2 poorest communities in Ventura County, then there's a lot of stressors that we go through, ¿verdad? And at one time, there's this methodology called the Adverse Children Experiences study, the ACEs study, and I was invited to work with Santa Paula High staff and other groups to talk about ACEs, and so. But what I find is that as a community, poor people in general are stressed to the max, just because. I mean, at this point in my life, with the career that I've had and being able to have a pension, and you don't really worry about money. You know that our house is paid for, we own our cars, we have money for gas and all of this. But I look back to the time when my jefita would be, penny pinching just to put some food on the table, and sometimes it was like we'd sit around the table and there'd be just one little piece of meat, ¿verdad? And it always went to my dad first, and everybody else had frijoles and arroz, ¿verdad? And sometimes my jefito would say, well, ¿quién quiere un pedacito? ¿Verdad? Nos daba, ¿verdad? Some of us would say,
Yeah.
some of us would say, so. But anyway, but getting back to the stressors in the community, ¿verdad? So after I retired, I was hired by the Ventura County Behavioral Health to do some outreach and to work on their mental health services plan, so-called MHSA, which is funded by millionaires. It's a millionaire's tax. Yeah. And so I started to learn about behavioral health and mental health and how it worked and all this. And having been a counselor myself, I knew a little bit about it. But anyway, so we started doing some things. We wrote a great plan, but then when it was time to deliver, because I had gone out in the community and promised all these things to them, but we're going to have programs. We're going to have, your children are going to get this. Your teenagers are going to do this. Domestic violence, we're going to take care of that. Drugs, alcohol, we're going to take all of that. And so we had a great plan, but then when it came down to deliver, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Still, it continued to be the same old thing. So anyway, so I got involved with behavioral health and didn't continue there for obvious reasons, and then later on, I became part of a committee. It was put together by Jaime Casillas, the plan. It was plan, and so we met with the director at that time, and we said, we go into this room, and there's about 4 community folks there, myself and 2 or 3 others, and then there's staff, and then there's contractors, people that have contracts with the agency, and we're supposed to talk about how to better serve the community and the allocation of funding and all of this, So right off the top, we said the staff need to leave and the contractors need to leave, because how can we expect them to vote on a project that is going to benefit them or not benefit them, because they're conflicted out, So if I'm there so that I get my share, right, that's not how it's supposed to work. I mean, the community should have the largest voice, and here we're outnumbered, 4-1. So we started fighting about that, and like all bureaucracies, they meeting you to death. We'll meet again. We'll talk about this. Nothing much gets done. At our next meeting, we're going to do this. We show up. Nothing much gets done, and that's a story of bureaucracies. And the problem with mental health today is that we have a department that is not in touch with the community. And part of the reason that we have El Centro del Pueblo in Santa Paula is because we wanted to do something about that, So at this centro, then we have a workshop. We have workshops on domestic violence, and one time, we're working with some mujeres, and some men showed up the day after, and they said, "What about us? What about us?" Le digo, "Are you being, brutalized?" He said, no, but, we have needs too, right? It seems to be all about the women. What about our needs, right? So we set up this group called Los Compadres, ¿verdad? Where they get together and they talk about their issues and all this, So we have a workshop called Tijereando la Mente, ¿verdad? Tijereando, of course, scissoring your mind, ¿verdad? Where a group of people get together and they put a problem on the table, and then people, it's very emotional, and then others around the table will say, well, that's happened to me too. This is how I resolved it, or I'm still struggling with that. So you show this commonality, this common experience and stressors that we all live through. And sometimes when you're, as you probably know, sometimes when we're facing a problem, or we make a wrong decision, or something's not going our way, we tend to blame ourselves, that it's our fault, right? And not realizing that others are going through that and have gone through that and will go through that again. So you just need a little bit of help to kind of like get you over, right? To have deeper understanding of the issues. Maybe a couple of suggestions on how to, talk to the other person or talk to your children a little bit differently. So like that, ¿verdad? We also have a yerbero, ¿verdad? That comes and he does treatments with hierbas and, it's free. And if somebody wants to continue treatment, then he has an office and then he'll, it's very reasonable. So they have that. We understand that the community needs cultural strengthening. So we do activities out in the community where we focus on El Día Internacional de la Mujer, ¿verdad? We honor, 6 women, ¿verdad? La super mama, ¿verdad? That's the one that handles her children and with pride, ¿verdad? That keeps them all in line, la super mama, ¿verdad? La mujer con trayectoria, ¿verdad? Which is a youngster, a young woman, usually high school, that are looking, that seem to have a future. They're bright. They're going somewhere, ¿verdad? They're assertive, right? We have la cariñosa, ¿verdad? And so there's 5 or 6 titles like that, ¿verdad? We give awards, and just more recently, the most recent one that we did, which has to go back to our work with the environment. We're the only green business in Santa Paula, ¿verdad? Our centro. And so we recently had an event at Veterans Park, and in talking through climate change amongst all of us, then we decided that we are going to do away with plastic. So whereas we used to Maria Jimenez, who's on Poder Popular, would say, I need 10 cases of water for the event at the park, ¿verdad? And then you'd have all this plastic, ¿verdad? And then, it adds up quickly, right? So we decided we don't do plastic anymore, ¿verdad? We bought glass cups, not plastic cups, ¿verdad? Glass cups, they're like mason jars with a little handle, ¿verdad? Okay. So we ordered, for our last event, we ordered about 100 of those, 150 of those. And so when it came to drinks, it was agua natural. And in their cup, they had their cup, ¿verdad? And then we served food, which was like sauteed vegetables on hojas de maíz o hojas de plátano, ¿verdad? Wow. No paper, nothing, ¿verdad? And it was like, it went real well. I mean, people were like, what's this all about, right? So we're saying, okay, do we have a community garden? We do food distribution on Thursdays, 300 to 400 familias that come through. So we used to give out plastic bags. So now we bought some. This lady said, just get a T-shirt, sew it up. You got a bag right there, wow. Right? So bring your T-shirt bag, ¿verdad? That's actually what they're called. Yeah. T-shirt plastic bags, ¿verdad? The ones that you get at the, So anyway, yeah. So we have a community garden called Tierra Sana, Humana Sana, or La Canasta Llena, ¿verdad? So we're in our 3rd harvest, ¿verdad? chiles, tomates, calabazas, cebollas. For Halloween, we had all these pumpkins. We're giving them away, and
cool.
all of that food, organic, giving away to the, you know.
Community.
And but back to the stressors. If the basic needs of a person or of a community are not being met, and the basic needs include shelter, healthcare, and food, survival things, right? If they don't have that, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they get stuck in that bottom level, and they don't think about school. If a child's hungry, they're not thinking about school. If the family is stressed, they're not thinking about how their child is doing in school. I mean, some of them do, but usually the stressors kind of, they take up all your time. So when we set up the centro, that's what we're thinking about. Is bringing mental health to individuals and trying to do something with the community as a whole. The Isabella project with their wellness wraparound services that we're planning to provide, that's going to go a long ways toward mental health. So children that are, when we looked at the high school students at Rick's High School, essentially we said every single child that steps in a classroom is aced out with those aces, And then teachers, unless you know what you're looking for, when Fernando walks in the door, it's like they only see this top 1/6 of who you are, and the rest of it, they don't even look any further, ¿verdad? If you come in upset, do they say, "Why are you upset?" They just say, "Sit down and shut up." I mean, so anyway, so the department has the behavioral health department has developed this group called the Disparities Committee, where they have a group of people that get together, and I used to go all the time. I don't participate as like I used to, because I don't see much progress, and I got better things to do. I figure if we can do the work that we're doing at the Centro on our lone little community, then then that's good enough for us.
So with the Disparities Committee,
Yeah.
you come together and make recommendations, or what is it that you do in that committee?
Well, it's one thing is that they get millions and millions of dollars. So how are they being spent? If you're looking at, there's a formula called the Holzer, Holzer formula, and that formula says that at any given moment, 7% of a given population has serious mental health needs. In Santa Paula, there's 30,000 people. 7% of 30,000 is about 2,000 individuals. Right now, the behavioral health department in Santa Paula may be on the high side, maybe serving a couple of hundred people.
Wow.
So the other 1,800, ¿verdad?
And it seems like a common thing for our people to do is kind of say, well, nobody else is going to do it. I guess I better get it done.
Well, and that's something that I bring up. A couple of things that I bring up, when I talk about that. One is that Santa Paula is the center of the universe. I mean, all of our experience from where I am in Santa Paula, all my experience emanates from there. The environment, the social environment, everything. And everybody can say that, but I say Santa Paula is the center of the universe. So, and then the other thing that I say is that we've been neglected for so long that we're a very resilient community. So when I first moved into town, there were 3 or 4 cliques that were just gangbanging all the time. The Crimies, the Party Boys, a couple of other cliques, and we set up this committee called Save Our Youth. And what we found with that is that the mothers and the grandmothers in a community like Santa Paula, they have a lot of control. So we found that the way to influence a youngster is to invite them to have some food. So Soy then would organize these barbecues down at the park, And then we'd invite these cliques to come. But we'd have 20, 30, 40, 50 señoras there ahead of time, ready, right? And then we'd be waiting, ¿verdad? And then these vatos would come in, all mad dogging everybody else, and almost as soon as they would walk into the park, 5, 10 señoras would go, oh, tienen hambre, come over here, come over here, come over here. The next clique would come in, the señoras would go and, welcome them, right? And then a few of us would come up and say a few things, and then we'd get in line for food, and so people didn't mind if they were, in line with somebody from another clique behind them or in front of them, because it was about the food. And so we were able to do some things with that methodology, and it kind of slowed it down, the violence. So yeah, but yeah, mental health is a big one. So I think we all have our issues. They say, some people say, well, they're on the spectrum, right? In my view, we're all on that spectrum, man. Some of us are a little más controlados que otros. Some of us are a little more crazy than others. I mean, but it's all good. I mean, we're human beings. We're not perfect, right? So, and we have to be accepting of that. Yeah.
Because again, having that conversation, that dialogue is what helps us strengthen our community and understand each other in ways that we can't do without communicating with each other and explaining to each other. And once we understand each other more.
Yeah. It's just part of evolution, that, society is evolving, and, we'll survive one way or another. And if we don't, Mother Nature will certainly survive. I'm
going to ask you one last question. It's funny because I feel like you've answered in so many ways this question, but I still like asking the question every time. Is you have all the resources, all the money, and you can make one change in the world. What is that going to be? What is that change that you want to make? If it could happen immediately, what would that be?
If I had all the money?
All the money, all the power, all the resources, all the support, everything.
Well, I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago where that question came up, and I said everybody should have a living wage, but that implies an employment hierarchy, where you have bosses, you have people that are making a lot, people that are not making anything. So I think good health, I think, is what it takes, and maybe it's because as I move on with my life, people are saying, "God, you're getting old." I'm not getting old, man. I'm just evolving. It's part of evolution. I mean, but lo and behold, it's like you start feeling pains here and there and here and there, and people will ask me, well, are you afraid about death? And I'll say, I don't think I am, but I hope I don't suffer when that time comes. So, yeah, I think great health, is for everybody. I think is the key, and that means that somebody got to provide it, and the institutions have to be able to accommodate that goal, right? And I don't think in a capitalist system, an industrial system right now, a system where you have settler colonialism to this day, where you have that hierarchy of power, then it's not, all of those things have to accommodate to this goal. So if I had the power, then I would make that change. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to tell the story.
I appreciate you being here, and I learned so much. Now when I see you out in the community, I'll see you in an entirely different way.
Next time I'll interview you.
I'm ready. No, I'm not.
If you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts, please call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. For victims of child abuse, domestic violence, or sexual assault, you can get help at the Safe Harbor inside the Family Justice Center by calling 805-652-7655. All services are free of charge and confidential. Addiction is treatable. Recovery from drug and alcohol problems start with a call or an email. For Ventura County Behavioral Health Substance Use Treatment Access Line, call 844-385-9200 or email sudservicesventura.org.